All right. Welcome, everybody. We just started the recording. Welcome to the Azure Data Fest, the 12 noon session. Just a quick reminder that this is being recorded. And we thank you for your attendance. The schedule is at the link you see there, as well as you can get a copy of the speaker slides. And we will be posting all the videos to YouTube once we gather all the recordings and get them up there. And then we've got some events coming up, so make sure you check that out as well. I'm not going to take any more of your time other than to hand the floor quickly over to Rob and let him take it from there. I will be moderating the chat as you have questions. So,
great, thank you. Thanks very much, Kyle. And I'll request control. So hi, everybody. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, or good noon, if that's a thing. So my name is Rob Lawrence, and I'm an account technology strategist at Microsoft. And today's talk is going to be on building executive support for analytics initiatives. And as you'll see during this talk, there's a lot of things that this has in common with any other type of initiative, but there are some things about analytics initiatives that are special. So to just give you an idea of how this talk will go today, I'm going to present the overall talk more or less straight through. Write down your questions and comments as you have them. I'm going to leave significant time on the back end for discussion, QA, and problem solving. The last time I presented this talk at a Data Fest, we ended up having a very detailed problem solving session for a couple people who were there, and we're trying to get executive support for initiatives they had on the table. So it was very timely for them, and we are happy to do that here. So with that, I'll kind of jump into the content. So first, a couple of things about me. I have been at Microsoft for 2 years. I've done about half of my career in consulting and the other half in technology. And I've spent a lot of time managing or driving data and analytics programs and advising executives on how to launch and run those types of programs. Now, I had all these cool pictures of me arriving at airports or playing in bands or driving a boat or something like that, but I thought I should use something that was a little more representative of my actual life. So that's me refereeing a fight, which is something I do a lot of. Those are my 3 sons. So because of my career mix, that split of consulting and technology, I've spent a lot of time, as I said, leading data and analytics programs, helping clients select data and analytics tools, and then getting executives to support both of the above. So that was about me, but I want to talk a little bit about all of us. And here I just mean humans. So this logo that you're seeing up here, this is from the Herman Company. And they created something called the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, or HBDI. And what that is, that's a model for capturing and presenting our preferred thinking styles. So if you've done Myers-Briggs or you've done Berkman or StrengthsFinders, it's a similar kind of tool to that, but I think this is a particularly good one.
Email me the requirements you need for your bookings integration.
Somebody's talking.
I'll work on tomorrow, but
someone is talking.
I don't
Sorry.
know. It shouldn't take us long, obviously.
I just need to mute somebody.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. So you may have tried one of the, like Myers-Briggs or a similar sort of style, but I find this really powerful because it focuses on how we think, not our personalities, so to speak. So there's 4 dominant types of thinking styles. So there's analysis, which is denoted by blue. That's people who are oriented to facts and data. There's process, or green. That's people who are oriented to order, routine, and predictability. There's imagination, which is yellow. That's people who are oriented to possibility and the big picture. And then lastly, you have expression, which is red. And these are people who are oriented to emotion, relating, and creative expression. So most people have 1 or 2 dominant styles. You occasionally meet somebody who has all 4, but my own 2 dominants are yellow and red. And apparently that's the orientation of most comedians, which I guess means I would be a comedian if I were funny, but instead I'm doing this. Now, why bring this up? It's not because these colors are the same as Microsoft's, which you might have noticed. That's just purely a coincidence. But it's because a lot of the people who do data and analytics work are what we call blue. So they are in that blue quadrant of analysis. It doesn't mean they're robotic or anything like that. They might actually be highly imaginative and expressive. But as a group, they're going to tend to focus on that analysis quadrant, which means they're going to see facts as being self-sufficient in themselves. They'll present facts and they'll be like, well, if I present the facts and I show that something is important, everyone else should just automatically get on board with me and they should understand. But that may leave the rest of the organization uninspired or missing the point or otherwise alienated from the effort. So when we work in this specific area of data and analytics, especially if we come out of that analysis quadrant, which I have a fair amount of myself, we have to realize not everyone is going to be excited by our projects in the same way. So a lot of this talk is about how to avoid that dynamic. So from here, I'm going to transition into discussing executive support. Now, there's an organization called ProSci. They are a research-based organization that focuses on the area of change management. So not in the technical sense of, code change management, but organizational change management. And the figures up here are from the 2016 survey. They have been doing the same exact survey with the same exact questions since 1998. And what they have found is, in 2016, only 29% of projects met or exceeded their objectives when they were led by ineffective sponsors who were characterized as ineffective by the participants. And they found that 71% of projects met or exceeded their objectives when they were led by effective sponsors. Now, this has been the top factor, active and visible executive sponsorship. It's the undefeated champion every year since ProSci started doing this survey. And they do it every few years. They're due for a new one. And we can bet that, once again, executive sponsorship will be on top. Now, data and analytics programs are no different than programs in general. So McKinsey found, also in 2016, that in high-performing data and analytics organizations, executive involvement was the most important reason for success. And they found that in low-performing data and analytics organizations, securing internal leadership for those initiatives was the most significant challenge. So you see the exact same pattern that we see for any type of change initiative. If we want to get people interested in data and analytics, engaging around it, using it to drive decisions, or even just bringing a system online successfully, we're going to need executive support. Now, I want to spend a little time talking about what executive support provides, because sometimes we just think of it in budgetary terms, right? So executives are important for a number of reasons, not just because they can say yes, not just because they can write a check. There's actually three types of support we need from them. So one is those funding and resource commitments, absolutely important. That's a prerequisite. But two, modeled behavior and recognition, which is to say that the things that executives do set an example. And then the third is mediation and conflict resolution. So higher level executives have the perspective and the power, both being important, to overcome siloed interests in an organization. Now, over the course of a major data and analytics program, right, it's not like you're just going to write a requirements document and a vision and everything is going to go great. The vision is going to change, the requirements going to change, you're going to find gotchas, you're going to find things that are not what you originally assumed. And if you do not have a strong, engaged sponsor beyond somebody who just wrote a check, you're not going to succeed. So that means that the executive needs to do the following. We're going to need active steering, which is not just cheerleading, not just sending happy emails, but actually understanding the details of the program at a reasonable level and being able to provide steering decisions. Some interest and engagement based on that real understanding, and then the ability to set a course as well as adjust that course based on new information. So these are all things we need from our executive support. And In the next section, I'm going to talk about why enthusiasm is not enough. This is going to be a little bit of a group participation exercise, and I'm going to ask you to put some comments up in the chat if you get a chance. Because when I deliver this particular talk in person, I usually do this as a group participation exercise. So first, let's talk about big data. And in each of the next three areas that we're going to talk about, I'm going to ask you three questions. So first, I'm going to ask the questions in regards to big data. And, if you only answer to yourself, that's fine. Or you can stick an answer in the chat, and then I'll tell you the answers I usually see. So big data. So my first question is, when did your organization start talking about big data? So either put that in the chat or just think it to yourself. 2, how would you grade your use of it right now? And then 3rd, what has gone right, what has gone wrong? Now, because I've given this talk a number of times, I will give you the answers I typically get. So for big data, for folks who have been in the data field long enough, I find most organizations started talking about big data in 2012 or 2013. The grade participants in these sessions usually give me is D or F. Usually, just the worst grade or completely failing. I see the occasional C. And in terms of what has gone right and gone wrong, what I hear is, well, we had a lot of good intent. We were talking about big data a lot for a few years, from about 2013 to maybe 2015 or 16. We did some pilot projects, really didn't get a lot off the ground, and we don't really use big data anywhere like, the hype was saying we would. So that's big data. So same questions for data lakes. So when did your org start implementing them, or at least talking about them? How would you grade the state they are in? And then what has gone right and gone wrong? Now, it looks like everybody's shy, so I'm going to skip over the group participation exercise part here, and I'll just tell you what answers I typically see. So for data lakes, some people are doing this now. Some were doing it a couple years ago, and a few sort of early and early middle adopters were doing this as early as 2015 or 16. Most give themselves around a C, in some cases lower. Occasionally they give themselves a B, but usually it's focused around a C. And when they talk about what has gone right or gone wrong, what they tend to tell me is, well, we started out with a data lake. It quickly turned into a data swamp. People started putting stuff in there. We lost interest. We weren't getting reliable data out of the lake, and we didn't have the executive support we needed to make it successful. So that's data lakes. And then for 3rd, data science. So again, the same question. When did your org start talking about data science? How would you grade your execution and application of it, and what has gone right and gone wrong? By now, you kind of know how this goes. So what I typically see here is we were talking about it in 2015 or 2016, maybe more recently. We made a lot of hires in the area of data science. How would I grade application and execution? Usually what people tell me is, well, we've got a lot of smart people in that group, but they kind of are off by themselves. We don't know what they're doing. They're not embedded in the organization. We're not using their insights to drive activity. And, in general, we feel like we've overspent on it and we haven't gotten the results we want. And that's what's gone wrong. What's gone right in some cases is they've come up with some really interesting insights. So, not the exact same story across those 3 technology areas, but I tend to see very similar answers, which are that people just don't know, just their data and analytics efforts are not getting the initial results they thought they would see. They're not living up to the hype. And in most cases, the problem is lack of executive sponsorship. So let's turn for a moment. I'm going to go through a number of figures that come from an organization called New Vantage. So New Vantage is headed by a gentleman named Thomas H. Davenport. He is the author of a few books, including Competing on Analytics, Keeping Up with the Quants, and a couple of others. So they do a survey every year, and they have trends, and this is from their most recent survey, which is in 2019. So what we see is in the area of data and analytics, there's a lot of enthusiasm and money, right? So the excuse we don't have money is not the problem. 97% of survey participants say yes to the phrase, we are investing in big data and AI. And 92% say that their investment in big data and AI is accelerating. But is it working? So those exact same people who give those exact same answers will say, we have not yet created a data-driven culture. That's 69% of them. And 53% say, we do not yet treat data as a business asset. And then finally, this is not a technical problem. So what most executives will say is that culture is the problem. They will say that either business adoption is slow and challenging, that's in about 3 out of 4 cases. And they will say, 95% will say that the challenges are people and process, not technology. So simply a staggering figure, right? So no matter what we have, no matter what we've bought, no matter what we've implemented, 19 times out of 20, we're going to find that the challenges are the people in the process rather than what we've implemented. Okay, so I don't think anything I have said here has probably surprised anyone, and you may say, yeah, okay, this is all stuff I know. What I want to get into is a discussion of why this is so difficult. And here, this is going to transition a little bit more into my personal insight from projects I've worked on. So issue number one, and when we talk about why is this so hard, the first issue is that data and analytics are infinite. So we've probably heard every client or every internal client say at some point, hey, we've got all this data, but we don't know what to do with it. If you have a pile of data, you have a pile of possibility. And when you run a program based on infinite possibility, it's hard to say what the goal is. So you never reach that goal and you never succeed. So that infinite quality of data is challenging. 2 is that needs vary. So if we have some corpus of data, say it's customer data, there's a lot of different players involved who all want something different from that data. So sales management may want insight into pipeline and close rates. Marketing may want insight into their messaging, the channels they're using, their conversion rates. Operations may care about customer satisfaction. All of these are valid needs. But when you try to prioritize with analytics, it's difficult. And there's a number of reasons why. One is that each insight you get is going to lead to a subsequent insight. So requirements and demand with analytics have a way of spiraling, which is quite different, right? If we think about rolling out a transactional application, we have some requirements. We're going to show people, what we're delivering to them, and when they see it, they're going to respond. Great. Hey, I like how it's going. Meets my need. With analytics, it doesn't work that way. Every time I show you something, you're going to get a new question, and so we are still dealing with that problem of infinity that's inherent to data and analytics in general. The third is that skills are lacking. So you may have seen stats predicting that there's a decade-long shortfall of data scientists. That we're going to be short 200,000 data scientists just in the United States, let alone worldwide. But there's even a bigger problem than that, which is general statistical literacy of the overall population. So a question to think about in the terms of your own workplace are how many managers can actually reason and make decisions with data? Have they been trained to do that? How many office workers? How many frontline workers? People out on a dock, in a store, working in some kind of hands-on job. According to the OECD, only about 35% of American adults can score at level 3 or higher on a numeracy scale that goes from 1 to 5. In other words, about 65% of American adults are level 2 or lower. And to give you a sense of what that means, level 2 entails only the most basic interpretation of clearly presented, unambiguous statistical information, like what does a pie chart mean? How does a percentage work, right? So we don't really have the right social conditions yet for data and analytics revolution. The fourth issue is that foundational work is critical. So in our CS 101 class, we learned that, the principle of garbage in, garbage out, which just means that if the inputs are bad, the outputs are going to be bad, and the conclusions are going to be bad. So if we have some kind of big goal, like quote unquote, we want to deliver high quality analytics across the enterprise, unquote, that means we're going to need to deliver a lot of high quality data. And frankly, we don't have that quality of data. And that means that in most cases, we're going to need to expend a lot of effort on integration, on governance, data wrangling, and so on. And unfortunately, those activities are not the same thing as business results. They're foundational, they're necessary, but they're not results. So we are always running the risk of one of two things. So one is that we do too little foundational work, which means that we're going to have data that is not trustworthy or high quality, or that we're going to do too much foundational work, which means we're going to burn budget. Someone's going to come tap us on the shoulder and say, well, hey, what are you folks doing over here? And we're just going to have expenditures without business results. The next issue is that integration is slow. So, and actually what I'll do is I'll bring up the next three issues all as a group. So the three issues are that integration is slow, definitions are unclear, definitions of data, and often context is missing. So we have data, but pulling that data together is going to take us a long time. If data isn't integrated, it's not going to be, we're not going to have everything we need to do a proper analysis, much less use it to drive a decision. If definitions are unclear, we're not going to know what we're dealing with, and we're not going to be able to analyze or make decisions. And if context is missing, we're going to have the same problem. Then the last one, this is kind of a problem of excess rather than shortage. It's that the available data we have isn't relevant. And this is a problem that I faced again and again when I was running analytics strategy projects. So my clients, when I was a consultant, often their analysts were very familiar with the data they had. They were comfortable with the data. They knew how to traverse all their tables. And, I think it gave them a great feeling of power and knowledge to be able to do that. But often that available data didn't provide any actionable insight. What they said were KPIs weren't really KPIs. They were just numbers and statistics, and they weren't really actionable. So these are eight rather, big reasons why this is so much harder to do with analytics than it is with other types of projects. So this brings us to the question of how do we motivate executives? And often when we're doing these projects, these four statements over on the left, these represent our view of our work, right? So we're going to say, well, we need better governance, right? And we need a data dictionary, and if we had better metadata, that would help. We would be able to discern context, or we need better visualization so end users can understand things. But the problem is these are all very abstract goals. So we're going to say, we need these four things, and can we have $13.4 million? Let me know how that works out for you. In my experience, it usually doesn't work very well. Executives can't relate to these abstract concerns, and when you say you need a big check to deliver a data dictionary or better metadata, you're just going to get a blank stare. Now, there's actually even a possibility that is worse, which is they might say yes, right? So then you're going to launch into a typical long-term enterprise analytics effort that's not very well directed. and is going to spend a lot of money, not necessarily produce a lot of results, and that can be a hazard to both you and your career. So how do we shift the focus, right? And in a lot of ways, this is 101. Put it in terms of what executives care about, right? So executives care about the following. They care about increasing their share in the market. They care about accelerating growth. They care about improving profitability. And they also, and this is very important and something we often don't think about, they care about staying compliant, because nobody wants to wind up in front of the board explaining why they didn't achieve compliance with some key thing that matters to auditors or government entities. So what I've found is when you come to executives and you talk about these things in very concrete terms, you don't just say increase share, but you get very specific for the industry and the competitors you're talking about. We would like to take share from so-and-so. We believe that we can take this customer segment from this competitor if we had this knowledge. When you put things in those terms, then the checkbook is going to open and you're going to start getting the type of engaged sponsorship that I was talking about earlier. This brings us to part 3, which I call specificity rules. Specificity is a concept I got from sports science, and it's very simple. It means practice the thing you want to get good at. Instead of having big, vague goals, have small, specific goals, and then deliver on them. So I'm going to start with this guy, and his name is Simon Sinek. And if you ever do any serial browsing of YouTube, which I do, you've probably seen him. So you can find him on YouTube explaining what's wrong with millennials and his opinion. That's strictly his opinion, not mine. But even more importantly, you may have seen his TED Talk, which is called Start With Why. So in starting an analytics project, you need to start with why. Now, what do you need to know about Simon Sinek? Well, a couple things. One is that he looks and sounds authoritative. He's got good hair, a strong jawline. He's got very convincing body language. You can watch him on camera. He stands there and you watch him and you just go, okay, wow, I'm paying attention to this guy. I believe what he's telling me. But the last thing you need to know about him is that he's right about this whole start with why thing. And starting with why is the key that is going to unlock your data and analytics effort. Not starting with what, not starting with how, but starting with why. So the first principle in starting with why is using a single issue to bring challenges to life. Now, this slide, with some modifications, comes from a BI strategy engagement I worked on a few years ago. In this particular case, we were working with an executive team. They said, hey, we want to use data and analytics to manage our business. And we said, that's great. We love big goals. We love ambition. But let's get really specific. Let's talk about a single issue first. So the area they cared most about was churn. So churn just means, when I have a customer, I lose that customer, now I no longer have them. So revenue went away, and this was an ad business. So, when they were getting steady income from a customer, there's no cost of sales, money's coming in, they're profitable, salespeople are taking home their bonuses, everyone's happy. Customer churns, now we have a problem for everybody. So everyone cared about churn. But what we found was nobody agreed about what churn was. So I actually created this map diagram and showed them this. So as you can see, someone at corporate might say, okay, look guys, we've got a big problem. Churn is 42%. So out there in the division, somebody would say, says who? I've only got 29% churn in my territory. And someone over on the West Coast might say, I've got less than that. And then when we get down to the region level, and we really start looking at individual customers and say, did they churn? Did they stop buying? We find that there were real details that were problematic. So somebody would say, well, McDonald's churned in your region. And somebody might say, well, no, they didn't. And I've got 5 separate franchises that have 20 McDonald's, and maybe one of them churned, but I'm still taking ad revenue from 4. Or they might say the dealership changed their name. So, your data says we didn't get revenue from X corporation, but now they're Y corporation. Someone might say define churn. They may say, I don't even know what you mean. Like if the customer doesn't pay me for a month, does that mean I have churn? Or they might say, well, they didn't pay us for a couple of months. They were having a rough quarter, but now they're back. So you counted that as churn, and it shouldn't have been churn. So we had all these discussions, right? And all showing how hard it is to use data to represent the reality of what's going on in the field. So when we were talking to the executive team, instead of saying, you need to improve your governance, you need better tracing of provenance or timeliness or data modeling or exception handling, we put the questions in these very concrete terms that the executive team could understand. So instead of saying governance, we said, well, what's churn and who decides what counts? Instead of talking about provenance, a term that people think is in Rhode Island, we'd say, where does the data actually come from? Timeliness. Instead of saying timeless, we say, how often is it updated? Instead of talking about data modeling, we'd say, well, what's the definition of a customer? What level of entity? Actually, I wouldn't put it that way because an executive team wouldn't understand that. But like say, what level of a corporation is a customer? Is it this subsidiary over here, or is it the overall one? These are all things we needed to figure out. And instead of talking about exception handling, we said, how do we manage change? Like if someone in the Midwest, say Detroit area, stops spending for 3 months because they can't pick up buyers in the summer anyway, are we going to count that as churn or not? And these were all key decisions. So actually this challenge and this disagreement over churn and how big it was for them, it was a blessing in disguise because it helped us educate that executive team and it helped us show them, this is the nature of data challenges, right? It's not just a matter of chucking a bunch of data in a lake and then running analytics and everybody's happy. There's going to be a lot of disagreement. We need definitions. We need agreements about what things mean. And these are all key to getting success. So takeaways from this example. And the big lesson is when you're working on getting executive support for a data initiative, solve one important problem first, right? So everything in the left-hand column in this table, these are big, vague goals that are impossible to achieve. So don't say we're going to get all our metrics defined. Instead, say we're going to pick 1 or 2 critical and complex metrics that actually affect the business, and we're going to get those defined. Don't say clean up all our data. Say we're going to clean up the data that supports those metrics, because that's the first problem we're trying to solve. Instead of saying we're going to create one big data dictionary, we're going to define the key parts of those metrics. We're going to make sure that every stakeholder in this chain agrees on what they mean. Instead of saying we're going to improve our visualizations, kind of classic vague goal, we're going to deliver one outstanding dashboard. So we're going to have one outstanding dashboard for churn that everybody is attuned to. And when they look at it, they're going to know that the data under there is agreed upon, that everyone knows what it means. They're going to know the last time it was refreshed, and we're going to agree, and it's going to drive a discussion. And then lastly, instead of going and pleading for more money, you're going to watch additional funding roll in because people are going to see the success that comes out of solving one important problem first. About what this means in terms of an overall approach. Now, obviously, it's 2020. We all love Agile. We all preach against Waterfall, and that is true. I'm 100% for that. And this is yet another area where we need to adhere to Agile principles in a cyclical approach to delivering value, right? So the cycle I recommend for analytics is what I call requirements, foundations, payoff, repeat. So requirements are, finding out what is critical to some important function in the business, break it down, define it, determine how rigorous it has to be, get all the dimensions you need, find all the corner cases, as in that churn example, and get it right. 2 is foundations. So then you have to acquire, wrangle, clean up, govern, whatever the words you prefer are, the data you're going to need to deliver against those requirements. And then third is what I call the payoff. So the payoff is where you get to do the fun stuff. So with the fun stuff, you're going to build a cool dashboard, you're going to start putting it in front of the right people, you're going to do your victory lap, you're going to hear how great your analytics are, and then you're going to see that additional funding roll in. And when the additional funding rolls in, what you're not going to do is start some great big, huge, data lake to end data lake projects. You're going to restart the cycle and you're going to solve the next problem. This is how you get and keep executive support. So in high school, I was on a debate team one year, and our coach was a former rural preacher. He's a colorful guy who used to spit tobacco juice out the window and was in general very entertaining. Anyway, his motto, which stayed with me, was tell him what you're going to say, tell him the thing, say it, and then tell him that you said it. So that stayed with me. So I just wanted to end by reiterating our three main points. The first one is that executive involvement is critical. The second is that enthusiasm is not enough. And the third is that specificity rules. So I hope these are principles that are useful to you as you go on an analytics journey. And I really would love to see you get the support of executives. So I'd like to spend a bit of time with anyone who's ready to talk about it. We got about 20 minutes left as promised. Who are you working with? Who are the executives in your organization? How do you work with them now? Which of these challenges in terms of getting support for data and analytics have you encountered? Which of them have you solved? Which are you still working on? And then what additional challenges do some newer technologies such as AI and machine learning pose for you? So with that, I will move from the presentation part to the discussion part. And of course, any questions if you have them. We'll start with questions. Comments or questions from anybody who's on? Is anyone working with executives right now or trying to win executive support or funding for a major analytic effort? No? Is anyone from my team, I see a couple of you on the call, have an observation or a question about the presentation or about the process of getting executive support for analytics initiatives to kind of prime the pump and start a little bit of discussion?
Hey, Rob. Chris here.
Hey, Chris, how you doing?
How you doing? Maybe a little off. Sorry, I'm hearing my echo. So if I'm talking funny, that's just the echo. Maybe a little off the track of the presentation, but just thinking in terms of real world potential data project scenarios. If I'm someone who has oversight of a large batch of data, and and I'm convinced that there's some answers, some guidance that we can get from that. What kind of data inventory do I need to start to make that case to say, hey, let's look into this, let's do something, like to even start the conversation. So like, I guess if I'm preparing to present, to my boss, to an executive, to say, hey, this is worth doing, what do I want to, what are some of the things that I want to make sure that I confirm that we have to prove that project's even going to be viable?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and this is something I dealt a lot with. And you may have noticed that one slide where I was talking about starting with the questions that you have to answer rather than the pile of data you happen to have. So, one thing we would run into very often, say it was that churn example, right? We might have like, 2/3 of a triangle, right? So we might say, well, we know who the customer is, we know who paid last month and who didn't, right? But we don't know the exact identity of the customer, and right now we don't have a definitive data source that helps us identify entities and tell them apart from each other, right? So there you can see that's a good example of really starting with the question to answer, or rather than here's just the data that we happen to have, right? So in a lot of cases, we found that people were very attached to metrics that they were just used to running, right? So say it was something like in a cable business, net adds, right? So they'd say, okay, well, what were net adds last month? Like, how many people did we add? How many dropped? How many churned? And we take that out, we net that out, we have net adds. But what if the business isn't getting any insight from that? What if the metric you actually need, all the key data points needed to compose that metric don't actually exist in all of your source systems? What if you need to go out and say buy data from a third party to triangulate and get that last data point that will actually let you let you have that metric? So that's why I recommend, I would really say that the approach is, let's start with the questions to be asked. And this is really tough for a lot of data analysts who just start by, look, here's a pile of data, give me insight from it. Sort of retraining them to think in terms of, these are the key questions in the chain of reasoning, right? And these are the data points we need to make a decision. And we've got 3 of them, but we don't have the 4th. So that would be my advice, coming back to that principle of start with why. And I see Kenneth in the window said he actually met Simon Sinek. Ah, cool. Oh, sure. Okay, so I actually have a question here from Kenneth. It says, I work in a university and I have access to some parts of the data warehouse, but not all of it. Do you have any advice on how to make a specific tractable problem if pieces of the solution might be missing? I've got some bright colleagues on the call. Kenneth, I don't want to put you on the spot. Would you mind explaining a little bit more detail of what pieces of data you might be missing?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, very clearly.
Okay. So the example that I have is I have access to academic data about things like what courses a student is taking, when they enrolled, what kind of progress they're making, but I don't necessarily have access to a lot of financial data about the kinds of ways they're interacting with the university financially, because there are controls around getting access to that data. But if I want to build a picture of student success and how students progress through a program, that financial data could be an important part of the piece, but I don't know if I can easily get access to that right away.
Right.
To build a case to probably get to that point.
Yeah. So this is a case where some of that is considered sensitive or need to know, more of a need to know basis, I assume, right? So that might be why you can't get the access to the financial part of the data.
Right. Or sometimes it's locked up in some other system that, because I say data warehouse, but the data warehouse is really this conglomeration of a lot of different systems. Right.
It really comes down to the true original sources of the data and the ones you can lay hands on and the ones you can't. So I actually think your example is a great instance of where you need executive support, right? So to offer up sort of one possible path to a solution there, it might be to say, say, I don't know all the functions of a university, but say you have someone who's responsible for overall student happiness and engagement or something, right? And say that, well, look, if I'm trying to figure out everything that's going on with the student, that financial picture is really important. So if I know they just took out a $10,000 loan for the semester, and they might be feeling some pressure, that's a key data point, right? And in the aggregate, I want to be able to look at what's going on with students. It would really be helpful if I could access this data. And if it is really PII, you know, maybe we need to anonymize what we're doing and we need to hide certain details, but still in the aggregate, we should be answering this question. So this is the kind of thing that, you know, if you just write the person who administers the data warehouse, they might say, well, that all sounds good, but I can't really help you with any of that. And this is why you need an executive sponsor. So is that a helpful sort of direction or answer?
Yeah, that definitely helps me.
Cool.
Thank you.
Right. Would anyone else?
And
like
also,
oh, yeah,
Rob,
go ahead, Maggie.
something I would like to add to this. From the data warehouse perspective, sometimes you don't really need the data in that such a granular level, right? So what I've seen customers been doing is that they actually kind of summarize the data before they even want to do another summarization, if that makes sense to you guys.
Right. Like, what can you do? Like, if it's summarized, is it okay? Even if.
Yeah, the summarized data from the source directly, and then it won't have those PI data, right? So, and then, you know, all you need to get to data warehouse is that summarized information from the source.
Right. Which still might require the executive support, right?
Correct.
At some point, somebody just said, well, we have a policy, we lock down all the financial data, and you can come up with a logical case for why you need it, a logical case for how you'd get it, and for how, you know, how you would protect the PII, but still there's no one there to help.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where that executive level support comes in.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, well, you know, if you have other comments or questions about this presentation, last time I showed this, a few people spoke up, you know, right on the spot in person, and then a bunch emailed me in the background later and said, hey, can you send me your presentation? So if you want to go get this from the repository later, please do. And as you saw, my email's in there. So feel free to email me with questions about it. If you have questions about techniques or how to get executive support. It's a really tricky thing. It's not like getting support for a basic new transactional system, and it's a set of skills we're still working on. So I hope this talk was useful to everybody today, and thank you for joining.
Excellent. Great presentation, Rob. Thanks for taking the time.
Sure. Thank you very much.
All right,
Welcome.
stopping the recording here.
Nice one, Rob.
Hey,
Thanks,
thank you.
Rob.